Welcome to Grow Organically, the podcast where we host candid discussions with wealth management and financial pros. Each episode, we break down factors that drive growth at wealth management firms and how organizations can continue to be forward thinkers in today's competitive landscape. Grow Organically is brought to you by Catchlight. You can access all our podcasts, including show notes and other resources to keep learning, at catchlight.ai. Dan Gilmartin is the host of Grow Organically and is the head of marketing at Catchlight.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Dan Gilmartin, head of marketing for Catchlight. Thrilled to have my friend Mark Bruno on the program today. Mark's the managing director and head of strategic advisory for Emigrant Partners. Prior to Emigrant, Mark was the managing director of wealth management at Informa. Prior to that, managing director at Echelon Partners. Before that, MD and associate publisher at Investment News, and prior to that, spent about 13 years at Crane Communications in various roles. He is also the host of the RIA Plus podcast. Must check it out on all your different platforms. Go get it. He's got some great guests on there, some great conversations. You can learn a lot. Mark, welcome to the program. Love for you to give a little bit more intro on yourself and tell us a little bit about your work at Emigrant.
Appreciate that. It's nice, one, to be on with you, two, to be on the other end of the mic. I'm really looking forward to this. Your job is a lot harder than you make it look. But no, definitely looking forward to our discussion here today. A little bit of background, appreciate the intro. The role that I have at Emigrant Partners as the head of strategic advisory is I sort of sit in the middle of our 19 partner firms and help them on a pretty wide range of what I would consider to be strategic planning initiatives. If I had to bucket what I do nice and neatly, it would really land on organic growth work, human capital, and also productivity and technology. That obviously can cover a lot of ground, but more than anything, my role and my team are really trying to help our firms figure out how to grow in the right way, and also how to make sure that they have the right staffing, structure, resources, and everything in place to execute on that effectively. We're also doing quite a bit of education, which is part of the reason we launched RIA Plus in 2023, right after I joined. We want to make sure that our 19 partner firms and the industry more broadly is really kind of looking around corners, getting a sense for what's coming next, either at a macro trend level or just more specifically looking at some best practices, looking at firms that are doing things differently, firms that are structuring their businesses differently, investing differently, and really doing something to systematically and institutionally drive growth. So I'm pretty lucky that I get to do this at Emigrant Partners for a really great group of firms. It's a really nice way to take what I've learned over the last 20 plus years. When I say that out loud, I really like,
Scary, right?
But being in media for a really long time, I always thought of myself as a one-to-many consultant. And now this is an opportunity for me to go one-to-one with 19 really great firms. So looking forward to the conversation here today and talking a little bit more about what I've been learning over the last year plus since I've been an Emigrant.
Awesome. Well, again, welcome to the program. So you just got back from Future Proof. I heard it was an awesome event, great feedback from our team that was out there. And I heard your panel was great. You talked about advisor comp and things like that. But we're not about advisor comp on Grow Organically. We're about organic growth. Love a quick debrief, if you could, about what you heard about organic growth. Anything interesting to report from Future Proof?
So I actually would make the case that organic growth and strategic compensation, which was the session focus at Future Proof, are attached at the hip. A lot of the times when we talk about organic growth, we're talking about not only the strategies, but the tactics and the different sort of technologies, the different investments that firms can make to drive organic growth. But I think it's really important, especially if you're a CEO or leadership at an RIA firm, to make sure that you do have the right compensation plans in place. And that's where it's a little bit like, I hate the term Wild West, right? Not only because it's overused, but it doesn't really mean anything. But every firm has a different way of thinking about how do they drive organic growth through incentive comp. And if you talk to 40 different RIAs, which I did at Future Proof, you'll get 40 different answers about how they've structured incentive compensation and also what the results are as far as organic growth goes. So I think it's incredibly important if you're a leader to really be thinking about, all right, I made these investments, perhaps. I'm working with a Catchlight or some of the other firms that are out there that can really help accelerate organic growth. But do I have the right alignment? Do I have the right carrot, right, so to speak, that makes sure if people are not necessarily, wired to grow, and that's sort of a separate conversation. Some people just wake up every day and want to grow, right? But other people really take a little bit more of a sort of systematic approach to it. Are they properly incentivized, right, to get out of bed and think about growth every day, even if they're not an advisor? You have a lot of really large firms that have teams, have operations individuals who are capable of helping to drive organic growth. But if they're not, compensated, in some way, right, by the organic growth that a firm might experience, it becomes a lot harder to consistently sort of embed that in not only the way they think, but the way they work. So lots of other, obviously discussions around more specific organic growth strategies and tactics. But for me, that's not only something that came up at Future Proof a lot, but it comes up almost every day with the work we do with our partner firms.
Yeah. Well, let's tease on that a little bit. You and I chatted a while ago, and we talked about having a growth orientation. And you sit in a really interesting position, working with 19 firms, and I think looking at a lot more. And we've talked about having a growth mindset, having the will and desire to grow, combined with that capacity. And you talked about getting out of bed in the morning and wanting to pick up the phone and do some work on organic growth. That mindset, that orientation, could be at the advisor level, could be at the CEO level, maybe chief growth officer level. How would you describe that? And maybe take it a little bit further and talk about where and how does it originate, and how can firms nurture it?
Sure. So I would almost break out the small and mid-sized firms from the larger firms in our industry, because I think that it's a different, well, it might be the same mindset. The way you execute on it is completely different. The smaller firms might be run by an individual or individuals who are great business developers, and they wake up every day, they think about growth, and they can move the needle by just doing, standard traditional business development. They can go out and they can do community events, they can work with COIs, and they can, if you're running a $200 million firm and you're bringing in $25 to $50 million every year, you can really move the needle. If you're a $1 billion plus firm, that one rainmaker can make an impact, but it's not at the same level. So to me, when I think about growth mindsets, I'm thinking about it from the CEO perspective, really more of that $1 billion plus firm. How does he or she structure a firm so not only it has the right strategy, right, but it has the right resources, it has the right culture, right, and it actually has the ability. When I say mindset, the mindset is really something that has to be embraced by everybody at the organization, and that's something that we are constantly talking about and looking at with our partner firms. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? Because you might have 25, 30, 50 employees that all have to have some growth orientation. I mentioned the compensation piece before. I think the other part that's really truly important is to say to your firms, why grow, right? When we think about organic growth, and the narrative is that the industry isn't really growing organically, and you want to change that mindset. You say to your firm, there are really two reasons why it's important to grow. One, obviously, it increases your enterprise value, right? I don't know that every single person at an organization will care as much about that, right? But leadership certainly will, and anybody who has an equity stake will. The other part is talent, right? If you're trying to attract talent, we know that at least $1 billion plus firms, 80-90% of firms are currently trying to hire new positions and are also trying to recruit advisors and other key roles. People want to work at firms that are in growth mode, right? So the idea and the ability to show that you can also make investments in technology, you can do everything to sort of improve every part of the organization, and growth, or good growth, leads to more good growth, right? That is something that it's not an easy thing to articulate and sort of embed throughout your firm, but it's the most important thing as a leader of a large RIA firm that you can do to make sure that everybody in the organization understands it, embraces it, and is growing in a systematic, I think maybe the most important thing, repeatable way. You're not just going out with raw energy every day, making 700 phone calls and saying, let's see what the day brings, right? There is a real process where sales, marketing, and the advisory teams are all working together, and they're all thinking about how they can help each other grow.
And I think it's I think you have two important elements there: the tech and the talent. Really, those together create the capacity within the firm to do the things. The will and desire, I think, is probably from that senior leadership, perhaps tied to that motivation factor of compensation to drive that. So love that perspective. When you look across the industry and you read the reports out there, they're suggesting that firms are seeing low single digit organic growth rates. And we know the impact of that organic growth can have on a firm's valuation. Where you sit in the world, again, pretty interesting catbird seat. You get to see a lot of what's going on within the firms that you work with, invest in, see those inner workings. Share with us a little bit about what those firms that you see are beating market averages in organic growth. What are they doing?
It's the hardest, but also maybe the most important question for me to answer for most of our partner firms. The reason it's the hardest is because if you look at 19 firms, they're all doing things completely differently, right? They have 19 different plans for executing organically. And we've seen pretty diverse organic growth rates on our team. So some firms are growing sort of very consistently in line with the rest of our industry. And then we have some firms that are outperformers by far. And if I could share some of those rates, I would, but we're talking like high double digits in many cases. And you would look at it and say, wow, I didn't know that there are firms that are that large and growing at that rate. What are they doing? The number one thing I would say is they're experimenting. And I know that that's not specific, right? But they are making pretty significant investments in digital and have been making pretty significant investments in digital for quite some time. They're also making pretty significant investments in their personnel, and more specifically in personnel that can drive sales and marketing. And I'll come back to that in just one second. And then the last part, and this is maybe the most important part, is they're thinking about how they organize their data in ways and at levels that very few firms are thinking about. When I look at the firms that are executing consistently and successfully, they're really, truly, not only are they using a CRM, right, but they're using it in ways so that they can see the full funnel, right, from top to bottom. They're also using it, and I should emphasize, the bottom of the funnel is not just when you convert someone to a client, it's when you turn them into an evangelist, right? So they're thinking about how do we acquire new assets, and obviously starting with prospects, all the way down to if we have 10, 20% of our clients who are consistently willing to make a referral and would like to actually do that, they would get some satisfaction in that. How do we sort of have a process, right, and a regular way of making sure that we take advantage of that? So the way they use data is they can more or less identify where any prospect at the very top, right, or any evangelist is at any given moment, right, in their cycle or their ability to refer a client from an evangelist perspective, or to be open or receptive to a call from a business developer that might move the prospect down to lead, right, and get a little bit further down in the consideration set. And it might not be a call either, right? It could be an email. It could actually be a LinkedIn message. And they have their data organized in a way that they also understand the preferences, right? Or the probability, more likely, that somebody would meaningfully engage with those firms. So that is definitely not the norm. It is a much more institutional approach to organic growth. But I'd say it's not about what they buy, right? It's really more about their understanding and their appreciation of data. And then just one final note on it, they're also content led. And not just content clearinghouses who are every day, producing blogs, podcasts, and webinars and are really focused on volume. They are focused on precision. They have content that matches the profile and the needs of their clients and core customers. So it's very strategic. It's very hard. I will say it's not easy. But those are the firms that once they've figured out how to get their house in order from a data perspective, what their prospects and clients really truly want, and the best ways to engage with them, those are the firms that have cracked the code.
Yeah, I love it. I love the notion of experimentation as a marketer. We're experimenting all the time. I've got a hypothesis, test it out. Did it work? Not work? Is there scale to it? Things like that. Love that mindset. And I think that's it's important to have that across the firm. And it's, to what we just talked about, that mindset. You have to be willing to try and fail
Absolutely.
on new ideas.
And if you don't have your data organized and you experiment, you'll just continue to fail, right?
Bad data in, bad data out.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And you'll never learn anything. That's, I think, maybe the most important lesson. You might have a couple of successes here and there, but it's probably no different than if you made 1,000 cold calls, you probably have a little bit of success, right? So again, if anybody who's really thinking about how do I move the needle institutionally, I really think it has to start with data.
Yeah, and totally agree. And you think about that data, and not only does it inform as you're going through a funnel, but it also can inform where you're starting. If you run campaigns, if you're doing digital, if you're doing referrals and things like that, you can go back over time and look at what was the best source of leads for my ICP. Define that ICP in the first place. I think some firms may struggle with that, but define that ICP, and then look at your funnel and understand where are my best leads coming from. Where am I getting a lot of leads, which may be great, but if they don't match your ICP and they're creating a lot of churn and burn through your sales process, you could just be wasting time. So understanding that funnel and segmenting from source all the way through to close one to advocate, super important. What's not working? I heard some chatter out at Future Proof about, and I think we've heard this now for over a year, that some of the fastest growing firms rely on referrals the least. But what else? What are you seeing some firms testing, and maybe what's not working? What should firms perhaps avoid?
So I would make the case that if something's not working and you have your data organized and you're engaged, you're still learning, right? So it's working just on a different level.
Sure.
There's that. It's hard to say that there is any consensus around failure. I will say I've seen a lot of firms, I touched on content before, that are developing content without a real content strategy. And what that means is they're just producing incredible amounts of content without any real intent. And coming out of the media business, and always being in B2B media, that was something that I always tried to reinforce in our market is we don't just create content, we create content with intent, right? And anybody who's worked for me is probably sick of hearing me say that. But the firms that I've seen who say we need to get more digital, but that is a terrible statement that almost always leads to failure, right? The real question that you should be asking is, why do we need to get more digital, right? And then in the process, how does that help us tell our story, right? And the unique problem that we solve, right, for our marketplace better than anyone else. So I know that there are a lot of firms that are out there that are producing blogs and podcasts, some that are building studios and bringing in incredible amounts of gear without any clear direction as to where they want to go with it. So I would say for those firms, take some time, but if they can be a little bit more client centric with any of the content that they're developing, it's great if all of a sudden you wanted to do a spot video or podcast or blog on the Fed's rate cut, right? But there are probably 7 billion of those takes out. If you're someone who focuses on, and we have a firm that specializes in working with pilots, for example, what a great opportunity if you wanted to have a take on the rate cut to do it specifically for pilots, right? So anything that you can do to always be speaking to your core clients, right, or prospects who are essentially fitting the profile of your core client, will make your content efforts that much more strategic. I'm a huge fan of precision and not a fan of volume. And volume is the fastest way to fail that I've seen in this space.
Yeah, burn yourself out.
Yeah, and you spend a lot of money doing it in the process. And we also know, just sort of to put a parentheses at the end of that paragraph. A lot of the people who are running RIA firms are not marketers and don't have a full appreciation for marketing and the marketing cycle. So we've seen firms that start making investments in marketing for the first time, and 30, 60, 90 days in, like, where are the results, right? It's not that kind of world. We live in a world where your marketing investments may take 12 to 36 months before you start to see material ROI, right? You need to be able to understand what's meaningful progress. But once you start spending money on creating content, once you start burning time on it, you will have people asking questions saying, all right, how many $5 million clients did we get from that video? So you sort of have to be prepared, and you need to know your external audience.
Yeah.
You also need to know your internal audience and what the stakeholders are looking for as well.
And what kind of questions they're going to ask. I love that notion, and I'm going to adopt that line, if I may, that content with intent. I know of an advisor does some great stuff on one of the social platforms, and then talk to them about how they're leveraging that content, building an audience, and then engaging that audience for their service. And it seemed like the back end of that equation was just missing. So what's the intent of the content that you're creating if it's not to generate dialogue with your prospects? So fascinating. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to get into some tactics. You and I had a conversation a while ago about this notion that there's some changing tactics within the marketing focus of some firms, where they're moving beyond just brand marketing to advisor marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that as a specific driver, a tactic for organic growth? And if so, why?
So it's an interesting shift in mindset, and I can't say that it's anything that's fully or wholly widespread. The first person that got me thinking about this was Stacy McKinnon, who is the COO and the CMO at Morton Wealth, one of our partner firms out in Calabasas. And it was just this question around, as someone who's in charge of marketing for an RA firm, how do you think about leveraging not only your spend, but your energy and your time? Do you promote the firm, right? Or do you redirect marketing investments so you're helping the advisors, basically with sales enablement, market themselves? So if you were to go on to LinkedIn and look at any of the advisors that Morton has, for example, they're producing pretty high quality but quick hit videos, right? That not only tell a story of who they are and what they do as a firm, but personally who they are, right, as individuals. And it does really resonate because it's the same thing as just having a conversation with someone. Their advisors are very good at having a post that may be about, say, something in the markets or something financial planning related, but then they'll also make sure to have a post when they're with their family at the park, right? And just doing something that obviously humanizes them. And I hate even using the word humanize, right? Because we are all obviously human, right? But when we market our companies and ourselves, we tend to do it in ways that are a little bit more like a stock art version of who we really are. So I think that's one firm that I'm familiar with that has really been rethinking about how they want to leverage their marketing efforts, and it's paid off. We've seen the results, and I would encourage others out there, whether you're the CMO or the CEO, and you're really thinking about marketing, to ask the question, right? How much value is there in promoting the brand itself versus the individual advisors? I think it's not an either or. I think it's both, right? But ultimately, the advisor is the one who is going to field that initial inquiry, do that meeting, take that call, and end up working with that individual. So, the brand may be what assigns credibility, on the front end. The individual is going to be the one who not only makes the sale, right, but does the work and lives with that family, that client, for hopefully a very long time. So there has to be some balance between the two.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, this is a business that's built on trust and nurtured through relationships, and so I think the advisor has to have a seat at that table from the value of that brand, because what you get at the end of the day as the investor is the relationship you have and the direction and guidance and advice of that advisor. I think the brand of the firm has to resonate, and maybe that's specifically through ICP. You talked about one of your firms working with pilots. That's got to be clear. But then is the individual advisor that's going to work with me as one of those pilots, is this somebody I can relate to and have a conversation with, and really be open about my hopes and dreams, my challenges, my fears, all that sort of stuff. This is an important element of that relationship that's created.
And the more it feels like a prospect or a lead knows you before they actually meet you, right? The higher the probability, forget even just the conversion rate, but that'll be a high quality client for you over time.
Yeah.
You feel like someone who's part of their community. It's funny, actually, my financial advisor was at Future Proof, and it was this really nice moment where I was like, all right, I made the right choice. I love Eric. He's been phenomenal for years. But while he was there, I was like, all right, you know what? I'm working with someone who's a peer, someone who has similar interests to me, and someone who I feel like, regardless if it's a Zoom or an in-office or a wealth festival, right? We're sort of in the same place, literally at the same time, both in our lives and obviously our professional careers too.
Yeah. Awesome connection and a way to bring that relationship together. So last question for you, Mark. And this is if you knew then what you know now. So take yourself and go 5 years in the past, and you're head of strategic advisory for Emigrant. What advice would you give yourself 5 years ago that you've learned over the last year to help you accelerate what you're doing, help you accelerate what your firms are doing?
I think 5 years is an interesting number. I'm glad you picked it.
The market's changed.
Yeah, very much so. And roughly 5 years ago was when I left Investment News after 12 years, and started to pursue opportunities in the industry as opposed to in media and just sort of on the periphery, so to speak. Even if we were at the center of it, and I would say it may not be organic growth, it may be inorganic growth, but there's a direct connection between the two. We sold Investment News from Crank Communications in 2018, and sold it to a company that was based in the UK. And it was the first time I was directly involved in any M&A transaction. I went to Echelon Partners right after that because I liked it for a lot of different reasons, but became really interested in truly figuring out how not only to get deals done, right, but how to make deals work. And I will be very blunt, that deal with Investment News did not work. We were acquired by a publicly traded company. If you want to look at the financials, anybody who's listening can go out and do that. But it was also just a cultural mismatch, right? So what I learned 5 years ago, and then by working at Echelon and now being at Emigrant, on the inorganic side, is that there's so much emphasis and conversation around M&A right now. It's one of the dominant themes. You go to any conference, it's M&A and it's AI, or it's taking up the majority of the airtime on stage. And that's not a bad thing, but I think the emphasis is always on deal making, right? It's on how do we get a deal done? That is a completely different process from how do we make a deal work? And I think what I've learned now is how important it is on the front end, right? To really say, what are we trying to accomplish as a combined business, but also as leadership team? When we start bringing people together, what are we trying to build here? And everybody always asks, how do we make 1 + 1 equal more than 2? I think the real question is, how do we make 1 + 1 equal 5 and make sure that everybody's actually happy, right? They feel like this is a good thing for the employees and this is a good thing for our clients. So I know that that's not necessarily a concise answer to what was a pretty broad question, but I think if I knew a little bit more about the mechanics of how to, one, make a deal work on the front end, but two, and maybe more importantly, how to make a deal work long term, right? And that's what drove me to Emigrant. I mean, we're long-term investors, and we're looking at relationships that are 10, 20, 30 years with our firms. It takes time to make deals work, right? So from my end, if I knew, if I could have given myself that advice, I would have said, listen, getting a deal done is just a small part of it, right? What happens after the close and on the Monday morning when everybody shows up to work together, and what's the plan for making it work over the next 5 to 10 years? I think we talk about it. I think a lot of firms pretend they have the answers to that, but you really need to work through that, right? In the 6, 12, 18 months that you're getting to know some of the firms that you're having discussions with on the front end. And to put a pin on the organic growth piece, if you're not looking at, what sort of growth synergies are there by combining our two firms, right? Do we have capabilities that would accelerate your ability to grow on the other end? Do we have similar clients in different regions and different ways that we can leverage our footprints there, our marketing and our brand? If you're not thinking about how do we drive accelerated organic growth as a result of bringing our two firms together, then you're doing a deal for the wrong reason.
Yeah, I think that second piece about that synergy on organic, without a doubt. I mean, we talked about data, we talked about experimentation. What can those two groups, when brought together, discover, learn from each other to help accelerate that? And on the inorganic front, I don't know if anybody's done a study, but I'd be curious to see how much time is consumed and perhaps wasted where that end result, that end mission of the value of the firms coming together is not met. How much time do you waste trying to put that together? And if it fails, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. How much time do we spend researching bad investment opportunities, bad stocks, right? And look, it's all part of the process. There's no question, right? But the time isn't wasted if you know where you want to be when you come through the other end of the process, right?
Yeah, and both parties agree and are focused on that.
100%.
Yeah. Mark, been a pleasure. Thank you for your time today. Great to have you on. Learned a lot from you. Whenever we chat, I always learn a lot from you. So really appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you having me on, Dan. And I can't believe that I went the whole interview without asking you a question. It's a little strange.
Well, I'm the host, so I get to ask the questions. But been awesome. I know you've been bouncing around East Coast, West Coast. I've seen you in New York. I've seen you in LA the last few weeks. So I hope you have a little bit of downtime. Rest those wings a little bit, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Same here. Thanks so much for having me on, Dan. I appreciate it.
Great. Appreciate it. And that wraps up this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Grow Organically. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Organically podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit catchlight.ai, where you can access all our podcasts, including show notes and other resources to keep learning. This podcast was produced by Catchlight Insights, LLC. It is for informational and educational purposes only. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer or recommendation of any securities and is not intended to provide tax, legal, or investment advice. The views expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of Catchlight or its affiliates, and are as of the date indicated, based on the information available at that time, and may change based on market or other conditions. Catchlight does not assume any duty to update any of the information. Catchlight and other third parties mentioned in the podcast are independent entities and not affiliated. Catchlight does not endorse any investment advisor or provide advice or recommendations to any prospective or existing client of an investment advisor as to the selection or retention of that investment advisor. The information is not intended for any person or entity in any jurisdiction where the distribution or use of such information would be contrary to local law. Third-party trademarks referenced herein are the property of the respective owners. All others are the property of Catchlight Insights, LLC, copyright 2024 Catchlight Insights, LLC. All rights reserved.